Okay, so welcome to Engineering Enterprise Trust and Commercial Authority, the 8-week technical ascent to the AI Integrity Group Joint Advisory Partnership. Today, I've got doing. So to start off with, I'll break down exactly what the idea is with the one-to-one fellowship, right? Ideally, this is more than a code review or an operational onboarding ramp. We're looking at things from a space where we don't want to do things according to the traditional education, which is basically isolated learning, generic certifications, and standalone code building, which is usually the processes that a lot of organizations go through in regards to their training. But what we want to be able to do is train our members and our community up through live mentorship like this so that it's much easier to take in. We will also do a video course as well, a discovery call in regards to asking questions or just being updated on any changes that have been made in the course. So yeah, the one-to-one elite fellowship is intentionally designed as a rigorous technical proving ground where your code base is the test. The ultimate outcome is not just certification, but an active contracting role under the AIG. So as we've mentioned before, our goal here is not just to give people your certification that you get from like your IAPPs, etc. We really just want to get people straight into active work whereby it really validates the certification that they're getting and the time that they're putting into the educational process and filling in the skill gap of becoming an architect or consultant. We've got a discount at the moment. So when you check our masterclass, you'll see that discount there. And this is essentially the process where we will do the technical hardening, going through the technical stuff and going through the repetitions that we need to go through to get you ready when the time comes, and everything will be done on the TAIGA platform, which is going to be your main base and your main workspace in terms of all the work that you're going to be doing. So the next stage is the phase 2 of this process. We've got a large database of clients, a pipeline of clients that we have access to that are always looking for consultations, that are always looking for technical work to be done within the company in terms of governance, risk, and compliance. There are no career pathways at the present moment, and essentially there is not even an entry level to this at the moment. So we're trying to build that process and create entry level work for people who are essentially have the skill set to come in, join our community, use our software and our tools, learn our processes, which have been tried and tested already. So you're not just going out there into the market. Even long term, if you do decide you want to set up your own boutique consultancy, or you just want to work as a solopreneur doing consultancy work via freelancing opportunities that are available in the market at the moment, then that would be your choice as well. So it's the 3-phase architectural model. So phase 1 of this process would be sessions 1 to 2, and this will include code base ingestion, environmental baselining, and data provenance. Phase 2 of this process will be going through runtime and guardrails. Sessions 3 to 5. So that's our human in the loop controls, policy as code execution, and adversarial red teaming. And then the last phase of this will be the commercial vanguard, which will be session 6 to 8. And this is where we literally give you all our AIG audit playbooks. You get pre-negotiated client matchmaking and partnership graduation, where essentially you start working on a client account and I will shadow you through the initial processes, just basically to get you set up and started and to understand exactly what your role is. So throughout phases 1 and 2, I will be working directly with you in your workspace or your environment to snap these enterprise grade security interceptors into your existing architecture. So what that basically means is I will be going through the process of showing you the tech stack, how the tech stack works, how to understand breaking it down into cryptographic registries like the NIST RMF and EU AI Act compliance. I'll also be going through policy as code control plane, which will be what helps you mitigate prompt injections and drift. And then we will finally go through the HITL telemetry, which would route edge cases to human review. And that's the final process where you basically combine all these processes to create a human review that basically breaks down what the software's already done. And then you can put it all together as a review for the client. And whenever they need that review, you send one through, or whenever we've agreed to provide them with the reviews, we send those through. The next stage would be, so session one, like I've mentioned before, is the onboarding and technical ingestion. I will talk more about this in terms of, so my instructor action lists would require me to review software layers and training code, map vector databases and API dependencies, establish baseline security posture, and then the initial risk and architecture topology map, where we will find the foundational schematics of the systems and vulnerabilities and integrations. So the next phase would be session two, which would be the architectural integrity and model provenance. In this section, I will be helping you audit ingestion points against EU AI Act, NIST RMF parameters. We'll also be embedding model versioning across fine-tuning pipelines. We'll deploy cryptographic registry checkpoints, and then the data provenance and model lineage verification ledger, which is basically an immutable, cryptographically secured record of your model's data history and built to withstand the regulatory scrutiny. So that would be session two, just making sure you understand the architectural integrity and model provenance. Section three is the human in the loop processes and controls and escalation that we spoke about earlier. In this process, we will be making sure that the AI decision pathway provides us with a low confidence threshold so that we can always make sure that in any scenario, we always have decision makers who can make the best possible decision. Session four will be the policy as code runtime architecture. In this process, we will be looking at embedding governance directly into the CI/CD pipelines. We'll also be looking at implementing deterministic runtime filters, securing against prompt injections and model drift. So essentially, the live policy as code control plane, which you find in TAIGA, this is where you will learn how to essentially understand what the processes are in regards to how TAIGA works as a policy as code and runtime architecture. And then this will give you a much easier understanding of, this will give you a better understanding of how the governance successfully gets hard coded and deployed into your production processes, right? So essentially, this is a very important stage in the process of understanding exactly how we go from that policy as code to a continuous governance infrastructure. And then as we move on into session five, we'll be looking at custom model security auditing and the penetration review. So in this process, we'll be looking at the hallucination risks, permission breaches, and adversarial prompts. So the instructor actions in this scenario would be to execute custom security audits on live code base and then aggressively red team model layers. So we will go through that process together of executing security audits on a live code base and initiating an aggressive red team through multiple model layers. And then this can allow us to essentially create a custom security and vulnerability audit report, which then can complete the documentation of the system resilience and final remediation states. So basically what that would be is just essentially the process of how you go about creating vulnerability audit report for the client and basically being able to give them. And like I said, this is all dependent on the scenario. So depending on what type of client you got on board, and each industry has its own processes that you have to go through. And then in section 6, we'll be mastering the TAIGA methodology, which is essentially the lead intake. So this is how this is basically our playbook on how we get leads in, take the lead through the process of understanding our architecture baseline, walking them through the TAIGA audit framework, and then the remediation workflow. So ideally, what we want to be doing at this stage is we want to be understanding how to unveil the proprietary AI Integrity Group real world client engagement playbooks, because this is what is going to really now set you apart from most consultants out there in terms of being able to go out there and set up your own consultancy, basically using our processes that have already been tried and tested, that you can now then go and start implementing and building your own consultancy. And essentially, this is all about empowerment. Like I said, the idea with what we're doing at the AI Integrity Group, working as a charity and being able to offer people the opportunity to work with us and our partners. We've worked very hard to build a massive partner network where we get constant work from them. And now that the EU AI Act is going to be dropping in a few days, on August the 2nd, the workload is just going to go up probably times 100, to be honest with you. I can only imagine at this point. And this is why we're in the process of trying to recruit at the moment. We're hiring left, right, and center. We're training and trying to provide everyone who joins as an architect and does our certification and goes through this fellowship and the joint advisory partnership can get to a point where they are established and can put themselves in a position where they are recognized within this space through our network. And then the next stage will be session 7, which will be the client-led matchmaking and proposal engineering. This is when we will be looking at reviewing the service positioning and advisory offerings, right? So we would look at breaking down exactly how our service is positioned and your service would be positioned and what advisory offerings you can offer, what makes the most sense for you moving forward in terms of whatever client base or client opportunities are available within your area. For example, let's say you are based in the States and the rules for the States and the EU are very different at the moment. The States predominantly uses NIST RMF, although if the business is in America and it's a global business that also functions in the EU, the EU AI Act will definitely be part of that process in terms of needing to be able to be governed. So for example, let's say yourself being in America right now, if you decided you wanted to just focus on, let's say, maybe local businesses or businesses within the state that you are at the moment, this is where we'd be looking at what type of positioning and advisory offerings you can specifically offer those people, right? Because the one thing people don't understand is it all really boils down to how you want to start. You can start small and grow, or you can just start going straight for the big fish. Ideally, I would always start small, locally, looking into your networks, business owners that you already know. Because like I said, a lot of businesses are already using AI, and a lot of businesses don't really understand governance. They don't understand risk and compliance. They don't understand the importance of governance when using AI. So that would be where you come in and you position yourself and say, look, I completely understand what you guys are trying to do. But to be honest with you, moving forward, I think you definitely need to be considering what your governance processes are going to look like, because as regulations continue to tighten over the next few months, especially in the EU, they could be looking at massive fines of up to 8% annual revenue, which for big companies, that's a lot of money. So that would be session 7. And this would be literally around the corner to finishing up with the whole fellowship and getting yourself into a position where you now can get into the joint advisory partnership. So this would be part of the process so that whenever you're reaching out to clients, you can use AI Integrity Group as, your backbone to say, these are the people that I work with. This is the community that I'm involved with. We're people of integrity, transparency, and accountability, which is what we're trying to bring into every single organization that we work with as well. So the vision behind this and the passion and the type of people we want working with us are very, very important in terms of how we present ourselves. We are the people that are setting the standard, right? It's really all about setting high standards when it comes to the deployment of AI. right? And making sure that everything is done ethically. And like I said, with transparency, accountability, and honesty. As we go into session 8, which will be the final session, in this session, the idea would be to conduct the formal fast track interview. So at this stage now, I will be personally putting client in front of you, essentially allowing you to have that conversation with the client and have a final evaluation of a audited code base and looking thoroughly into the playbook execution, which is basically literally what we would have gone through in session 7, sitting down, looking at that client and basically saying to ourselves, right, how do we approach this client? Because there's so many different ways depending on what industry you're going into, what location you are. We've got our standard retainers, we've got our standard playbooks, but like I said, we may need to adjust those systems and those playbooks depending on exactly what your market looks like and the market that you're looking to try and get into, right? So we will provide you with options within our pipeline of clients and say, right, look, these are your options. We've got US based clients. We've got clients that are more interested in working with regulators. We've got clients that are more interested in working with technical engineers, right? And all of these processes are things that by that point you'll be able to do because like I said, we've created a system where the technical side of things is pretty much all automated now. There's not a lot of technical stuff that you have to do. And we've got an engineering team as well there. So even if it comes to the point where there's certain places that you potentially could get stuck technically, we can still provide you with support from one of our engineers or someone who can come in and deal with that. That's the beauty of being part of a community. What people don't realize is going into this space by yourself, trying to learn all of these processes by yourself, and then trying to go out there, find clients for yourself. Yeah, it's a process. It's taken me probably 6 months now to really be able to get to the point where, and even now, I'm not where I want to be. I know there's a lot more I can still do. There's a lot more processes I can still fine tune because the space that we're going into requires the utmost, level of professionalism, large sums of money to our clients. And if we can't justify that by turning up professionally and, being able to execute on what we've said, execute on, then ultimately we destroy the brand. Right. So this is essentially the first session, right? Session 1, onboarding and technical ingestion. So the objective of this session is to establish your dedicated TAIGA tenant workspace, ingest your active software code base, and compile an audit-ready initial risk and architecture topology map. Right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get you set up, get your workspace set up. So David, right. And then we've got the project workspace title here, which is just, an example title that we're going to use for this specific session. And then we've got me as the assigned auditor, who's going to be the lead governance auditor that's going to be mentoring you through this process as we go forward. And potentially at some point, maybe you might end up being a lead governance auditor yourself that can do these processes. So that's the goal. But yeah, we'll get there. And then, so the framework baseline selection is going to be the EU AI Act. We can pick. So depending on, what you're going to be specifically focused on, we can look at either just focusing on EU AI Act, NIST AI RMF, or ISO 42001. We're going to focus on all of them because they're all very important going into the space that we're going to be going into. And
the EU AI Act deals more with the European region. The NIST AI RF deals more with the US. I'm familiar with the ISO IC 42001. Does that focus in a particular region or what?
Yes, so I'll break down ISO to you very quickly. So the ISO 42001 is essentially the world's first international standard for artificial intelligence management systems, right? It provides a structural framework for the organizations for different types of organizations, essentially to responsibly develop, provide and use AI systems. The key aspects of it are the standards, which includes AI risk management, ethical governance, and continuous system improvement. So in regards to whether it is more based around EU or America, in all honesty, it actually aligns more, I feel, with the EU AI Act rules than it does with NIST. Because why I say that is because NIST has been built for for Silicon Valley. That's what NIST was really made for, like, and Silicon Valley, I think, even rejected it very quickly. So what they've done is that I think they've taken NIST and it's only applicable in specific states. But right now in America, there's actually quite a few states that do not have any sort of regulation at all. You can go start a business, use AI there, and there's no regulation, right? So the issue then becomes, what is the point if you're starting a business and you want your business to be a global business? Because if you want your business to be a global business, the EU is a massive market, Europe is a massive, massive market. A company, let's say, for example, like Apple, if they turned around and were regulated and they decided, because AI has been regulated, we're no longer in the EU, we're no longer providing our AI services via Apple in the EU, right? They could turn around and do that, but what would be the repercussions of that? It would cause a massive backlash in terms of business for them, because they would lose a massive client base. Because obviously, AI is everyone's after the next big tech, and that's AI. Right. So if you don't have that tech on your phone or on your devices, essentially moving forward, you're going to get left behind.
True.
So what I would say is ISO it's a very, very good, system and standards in terms of aims. So when I say aims, I mean artificial intelligence management systems, right? So ISO was put in place to basically artificial intelligence management systems, right?
Right.
But I would not say it's as complete as the EU AI Act, but it definitely complements it. So in any case moving forward, regardless, I think it's good to understand all of these, all of these frameworks, because the more frameworks you understand, the more flexible you are. This is one thing about doing this mentorship. It allows you to ask questions and we can go deep, we can deep dive into specific topics. But what people don't realize is that being able to understand multiple frameworks is what sets you apart from everyone out there who's just using one framework.
True.
Right? So when you can come in and as a consultant, businesses are coming to me and they're asking me, do you use EU AI Act? Yes. What about NIST? Yes. Wow. What about ISO? Oh, yes. Okay. Because those are the well-renowned frameworks, right? But even within these frameworks don't give us an even more detailed picture of really how governance works and how governance should be working. My personal, I've sent you my white paper, and my 4-pillar framework does that. It goes further into detail of what EU AI Act has, put in place, NIST has put in place, and ISO. Because EU AI Act, one of the big factors of the EU AI Act is it requires human in the loop process. So everything at no stage within the EU AI Act, essentially, when you deploy AI, you have to be able to take accountability for that AI. There must be a human in the loop who can take accountability for what that AI does. That is a must. It is mandatory. So this is one of the reasons why this space is going to grow in terms of architecture, in terms of governance consultants, in terms of engineers, everybody, because this is one of the few spaces out there in the whole of AI, the AI market that is pushing for human beings to be added to the workflow, right? A lot of other industries are saying, no, get rid of engineers. We're fine. We've got Claude. Claude can do a better job engineering now, or what they're doing now is they're getting rid of engineers and they're hiring maybe like a chief engineer who then manages multiple agents. So instead of employing other engineers, there's only one engineer who's managing multiple AI engineers. Whereas for this space that we're going into governance is the exact opposite. This is the space where for every deployment, there must be a human in the loop. And now you can imagine in companies, for example, massive companies like your Apples, your Nikes, these Fortune 500 companies have multiple departments in multiple countries. Now imagine in every one of those departments, you can't just have one individual at the top. Every one of those departments has to have a human in the loop, the AI governance. So this space is going to grow massively. There's going to be entry-level jobs. There's going to be high-level, there's going to be high-level technical chief AI, chief governance jobs available. And once you finish this masterclass, once you're done with this whole process, you will definitely be in a position to be able to take on those high-level jobs. And I'm talking about jobs that are commanding right now 95 to 160K. That is only going to go up. As soon as an entry level comes in, as soon as entry level jobs come in, the value of the people at the top goes up. So that is only going to go up. I can see within the next maybe 2 to 3 years, chief AI officers, chief AI governance officers, lead architects, etc. We're going to be looking at like probably 200 to 300K annually for those type of jobs. So imagine if you are running your own consultancy and hiring consultants, teaching consultants, like what we're doing at the moment, and you join part of this community and grow, like the world is your oyster. Because would you rather be someone that's working for a company making 200 a year and getting taxed pretty much half of it anyway? Or would you rather have your own consultancy where you are essentially paying people 200,000 a year because you can afford to get those retainers at 500K at, who knows what amount of money at that stage. So the long term here is just the long-term value proposition of this space is just it's going to be unreal. Okay, now that we've covered that, we've set you up. The goal of this overview essentially is to establish a fellow tenant with multi-role governance access, to connect code-based repo and trigger real-time AI dependency scans, to tag processing data and model execution graph nodes, to identify unencrypted transit, missing guardrails and shadow links, and then to export the signed initial risk architecture map. So that is essentially what the goal of this first session is going to be, to get you to the point where you understand these processes.
Right.
Cool. So we move on to the next, which is code ingestion. So what we would do when it comes to the code ingestion is ideally when a customer comes on board, they are going to give you their GitHub where most of their engineers would have essentially set up a GitHub for us to have an understanding of exactly, what their pipeline looks like, what their situation looks like in terms of all the engineering processes that they've gone through within the business already in regards to their governance. So if you've read my white paper, this is part of the initial analysis, gap analysis, where we try and see, right, what's missing? What don't they have already? Because you might go into a company and that company might have governance individuals in there already, a governance consultant they're working with, but they may not necessarily have engineered what we can engineer for them. So what we need to figure out is, what have you guys built so far? What does your software stack look like? What does your hardware stack look like? And how can we come in and make that better? So by going into their GitHub, what we can do is we can run through this scanner and ingestions. This is the ingestion scanner where we can scan their GitHub and we will get results that will give us an idea of what they need.
Right.
So I'll run that scan now, and essentially what it would give us is this process here where it says ingestion telemetry complete, right? And it gives us 5 graph nodes and what was discovered, right? So based on their GitHub, we can see whether they've got OpenAI, what systems they're using. So the model configurations. So for example, here they're using OpenAI GPT-4 as their main API, right? They're also using local llama 3.7. And then we can also see their data stores. They're using Pinecone vector store and customer orders SQL. And then we can look at their dependencies, their LangChain agent tools. So this is what they're depending on in terms of their agent tools to get work done within their business. And then they're also using web scraper pipelines. And that would probably be for, let's say, something like lead gen, etc. So now once we have an idea of their code-based linking and automated source telemetry, we can now then go in and connect the repository to trigger TAIGA's deep dependency discovery engine, and we can have a look at the node graph mapping, right? So this is the mapping that it's given us. It basically breaks down the TAIGA topology module, which is each node categorized and tagged, right? So what we would go into, these are when we say nodes, right? We're basically, these are essentially the results of the code ingestion, right?
Right.
A deeper dive into the results of the code ingestion. This is where we now look into the data source. So that is where the customer orders SQL and S3 bucket lies. So this is essentially where their main data source for this company. This is where their user prompts and raw order data would be contained via their PII and all their historical transaction logs and customer IDs, right? So this is something that we can then tag the node to say, cool, we've tagged that and it's been verified. We know it exists. And then we would also look at the processing. So the Pinecone vector store, which is their RAG retrieval loop, text embedding 3 large vectors for similarity search. So this is basically their RAG retrieval loop, right? And this is how they process their data source. So once the data comes in and they've logged their data, they've got all the historical transactions, the customer IDs. At that point, they can initiate processing the data using a RAG retrieval loop. So we know they're processing their data. We can tag that. The next stage of processing would be the LangChain orchestration agent, which they're using, and the agentic tooling and routing executes autonomous tool calls to internal CRM endpoints. So that's what this LangChain orchestration agent does. And it basically tells us, right, this is what it's doing. We can tag that and say, okay, we understand that that's part of the process. And then in terms of execution now, the baseline of what they're using to execute the ingestion is OpenAI API with a direct customer context injection. So we can confirm that and we can tag the node. And then the next process would be the other execution, which is Llama. And that has been fine-tuned a fine-tuned internal model, self-hosted VLLM container running a local workstation cluster. So now we understand exactly what the topology is. Essentially, the TAIGA topology module allows this allows us to see what the topology is from the data source all the way down to execution. Once we have an understanding of all of these, we can tag the node and then we proceed to step 4. So step 4 is the baseline security, right? And at this stage, we're looking at the baseline security posture and vulnerability analysis. We can run a baseline audit by clicking here. And essentially from running this audit, we should get a result here, which shows us exactly what we would be looking at. So like I said, this is a simulation. Just to give you an example, so we don't have to waste time going through the system, basically spending another 5 minutes to 10 minutes doing a baseline audit. So once the audit comes back, this is what it will give you in terms of any vulnerabilities or what posture the situation is, right? So it tells you the first thing is we've got an unencrypted data transit in the CR. So there's raw prompts transmitted without TLS or PII scrubbing. And then at this point, we can use the software to apply a fix, or we can go manually in and apply the fix ourselves. We've also got an issue with the absence of edge guardrail injection filters. So that's something we would need to solve for them, right? And then we could do that like either through the automations, or we could go and do that manually, right? So either way, this can be solved. And then we move on to step 5. So at step 5, once we've essentially onboarded the clients and we've gone through the initial risk and architecture topology, we've looked at their topology, we've seen the baseline security issues, we can now go to the customer and say, right, this is what we've noticed in terms of, your GitHub repository or whatever they're using as a repository. This is what we've noticed. This is what we're going to bring up. You can export that audit ready topology map. So this is similar to our registry scan. It works in the same way, just without. This is a more internal than the registry scan. The registry scan it scans more of the external, what they have outside of the business in terms of their website, EU AI repositories where you're required to deposit information in regards to your company, your company's house information, all that public data. That's what the registry scanner is for. And this one is more for internal processes. So once this is done, as you can see, this is what it would look like. The TAIGA AI Governance Audit Certificate. It would show the initial risk and architecture topology for your client. So your tenant would be Apex Retail AI Core. The fellow would be yourself, David, and then the lead auditor would be myself. So this is an example. And then the active framework targets EU AI Act. It breaks down everything that it targets, so forth. And then the auditor sign-off status is passed, session 1 clearance, signed off cryptographically by lead governance auditor Ash Masoa, proceed to session 2. So essentially, this would be the process in which we would get our scan, like the registry scan. Once we've finished this, I'll go and do a registry scan for you just to show you exactly, the breakdown of what the registry scan. I don't know if you've seen one of the examples of registry scan that I've done before.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I will do a registry scan and I'll get that over to you so you can see exactly what that looks like. But essentially at this point, we would have covered everything that we need to cover, and we can now say this session is done in terms of the initial session 1, understanding the initial risk and architecture topology map. We can print out your certificate and I'll send that to you via LinkedIn or WhatsApp. And we're pretty much done with session 1. And we can now look into going into session 2. So literally that was like roughly about half an hour as well. And it's not a long process. It gets more intense as we go along, but this is the first process that you'd be required to, once you get into understanding how to deal with the company and get them set up, right? You'd need to go through this initial risk and architecture topology map. And then once you get results from this, you would do your review. You'd get an audit printed out, or an audit exported as a PDF file. And then you can send that to your client with a breakdown of exactly what the next process is.
From the little information I've seen, is this the same as carrying out a risk assessment?
So yes. So this would be the same as carrying out a risk assessment. Essentially, what this is a risk assessment is a lot more detailed, right?
Okay.
So when we're looking at carrying out risk assessments, it depends whether we're talking about carrying out a risk assessment manually or automated. Because remember, our whole vision moving forward is policy as code. We don't want you to have to spend 2 days doing a risk assessment. Because when we're talking about Fortune 500 companies, trying to do a risk assessment manually is a very, very difficult process.
Right.
So ideally, what we want to be doing is we want to be looking at everything that they've got an open end and what they've put into a GitHub repository. We basically get them to understand that they're going to need to put all their stuff within their business into code. They're going to need to turn it into some sort of code or some sort of data that we can access to understand exactly how they run everything within their business. So that is why we use GitHub, because GitHub allows that company to be able to turn essentially their whole business into code and break it down into code. They can put that then into a GitHub repository, and they should have engineers who can do this for them. If they don't, then we can assign an engineer who can do all of this for them, which just raises the cost of, the service that we're offering to them. And then essentially we can build a GitHub. We can turn their business into essentially code so that we can read it in code and we can deal with the problems in code.
Right.
Because ideally, whatever they're doing with AI is in code anyway. Every AI process that they are going through within their company is being done in code. So why isn't your policy being done in code? This is where the gap is right now in the market when it comes to governance and implementation of governance. Most governance architects, most governance consultants are doing these things manually, and it's taking them months. Your average consultant right now, it takes them 8 months to do just an audit.
Wow.
You know, they're saying roughly between, actually, it's not even 8, it's 12 to 18 months, depending on the size of the company, right? So yeah, for small businesses and small companies, this may be something that can be done quickly, manually. That I do not deny. Yes, for small businesses. But we're not trying to work with small businesses. We're trying to go for companies that are making over at least 1 million. You know, over at least 1 million, if not, you know, at least 10 million, right? We're trying to go for the big boys because the big boys are the ones who are going to pay the big money.
Yes.
Right. So, so when we're looking at the big boys, we're looking at one company alone may have possibly even up to 50 departments. Or 50 locations, whichever you want to call it. And each location is going to have its own, you know, its own individual consultant that needs to go through that location, understand exactly what data they have, turn their data into code. We read the code and understand exactly where they're lacking in terms of their risk and architecture topology. Then we can now put something together for them to turn around and say, right, this is where your issues are, and this is how we can resolve your issues.
Awesome.
So I mean, I think you've pretty much got a picture of essentially what we're trying to do moving forward. We're trying to make this as simple and straightforward and as least technical as possible. We want this to be something that doesn't require someone with who has to come in and be extremely technical, because we understand that the more technical this is, the harder then it is to explain to the client.
Right.
You know? And it's a good question that you asked in regards to, okay, so who then explains this to the client? It's a good question. And the answer to that question is you. They're not going to have someone in the company who's already understands these processes and governance, or else they wouldn't need us. So the person whose job it is to now go back and relay this information via, you know, emails, whether it needs to be done through Zoom call, whether it needs to be whichever way you've agreed to communicate with that client, because every client is different. Right? Some clients aren't easily available for Zoom calls whenever and whenever. So they prefer to be contacted via emails. So it would be about breaking it down to them within an email and saying, right, this is your risk topology. This is the situation. If you want to explain it in more detail, we can get on a call and I can break it all down to you. The people that they may have within the company, they may be able to look at this and understand it, is their engineers. The engineers may be able to say, okay, yeah, I completely understand what this is about and what they're saying. And yeah, this is the next process. This is what we're going to need to do. And then they can tick it off on their end and say, okay, cool. We understand this. But ideally, they're hiring you to come in as that person who basically deals with everything for them, explains everything to them, and basically breaks it down to them, because you're going to be on retainer, remember?
Right.
So this isn't something, or if you're not on retainer, you're going to be on an hourly. People are going to be consulting you on an hourly basis. So literally you might even be needing to do this live in some cases, because that's what I've had to do. With some clients, I've literally had to go live with them on Zoom and go through processes with them. But but at that time, I'm charging them 800 US to 1,000 US an hour for my time.
Right.
So regardless of whichever way they want to go around the processes, we are flexible. And by the time we finish these sessions, you'll be more than capable of doing these conversations and Zoom calls and putting out highly detailed emails that basically break everything down.
I'm scared.
It's serious stuff. It's serious stuff. You know, and obviously with these clients, before we even get to this process, once we've, you know, had the conversations with them and they fully understand what we're going to come in and do, and we've signed contracts, we've signed NDAs, we've signed a lot of paperwork. So we can't afford to get anything wrong, because that falls back on us.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
So yeah, it is scary at the start. It is something that, you know, but trust me when I say I will make sure that by the time you need to be in front of clients, you're fully prepared and yeah, you'll be more than confident enough to get the job done.
That would be great. That would be great.
Awesome. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for today. What I'm going to do is I'm going to print the certificate for this first part, just to say that you've completed it, and I'll send that over to you via WhatsApp. and then tomorrow we can get started with session 2.
Good. So to have access to this,
Yes.
so that I can
Another
go
thing
through
is,
it again and all that. Yeah.
yes. So I'll send you a copy of this recording. It will take probably about half an hour for the whole recording to upload onto my PC. And then once it's ready, I'll send you this recording tonight so you can go over it whenever you need to go over it.
Right. Then the site itself, the TAIGA.
Okay, so yeah, with TAIGA at the present moment, you can access TAIGA via my website. So if you go on the website, there should be an option that says access TAIGA, and you can go straight on there right now. You can get access to TAIGA, and you can go through everything that you need to go through. Some of the areas on TAIGA are locked because of licensing that's required. But you can actually go on there and run a TAIGA registry. So you can scan, what I would suggest you do next is just go on there and try scanning a couple of businesses, maybe local to your area. Just put those businesses into the scanner, the registry scanner. It will bring up it will bring up all the information, and then you can print that out or see that as as an audit report. And then, that should kind of give you an idea of the auditing process. And then,
Sounds good.
Perfect. Appreciate your time once again today. I know it's been difficult because of the time difference that we have.
Time difference. Yes.
Yeah, but it's all good. We'll always make a plan.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate your time and the accommodation too.
You're more than welcome. I look forward to tomorrow's session, or whenever you're ready next, just let me know, because like I said, no pressure.
Sure. I'll let you know. I'm gonna chat you up and I'll let you know.
Okay. All right. Enjoy your afternoon, I guess, down there. It's evening for me now here. It's almost 8 o'clock. So yeah, we'll catch up tomorrow.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Right. Welcome to session 2 of the fellowship curriculum. And today we're going to be going into architectural integrity and model provenance. The objective is to establish data provenance, verify training and fine-tuning pipelines, and hard code cryptographic SHA 256 model versioning inside the fellows software layers using TAIGA. So the idea with this is we will be looking at a provenance audit. So that is our data set, lineage screening. Then we'll go into looking at crypto registry, SHA 256 model versioning, and then the RAG auditor, vector DB leakage check, and CI/CD gateways, automated build hooks. And then lastly, the ledger export, data lineage ledger. So just a little note from me here. Under modern compliance frameworks, if you can't prove where a fine-tuning data set originated or whether it contains restricted data, the entire model layer becomes a legal liability at runtime. So this part here is very, very important in the sense that when we're looking at the TAIGA data provenance module and ensuring data set lineage screening, we need to verify origin, licenses, and copyright privacy sensitivity across training, fine-tuning, and RAG datasets. So as I've mentioned so many times before, with TAIGA, the whole point of this platform is these are processes that in any other situation, you would have to do manually. You would have to find a way to get this done manually. And usually that requires PDF reports and a lot of time on your computer, putting together files, doing checks, going through data sets, checking online registries, so forth and so forth, which can take weeks, if if not months, depending on the size of the business. Right. So we've literally put this whole system into TAIGA and made it so that all you need to do is click this button right here for each process and it will do the job for you. So for example, here, if I click here, you'll have a prompt in TAIGA, and all you need to do is click the run copyright and lineage screening. And what you'll get is this type of response. So basically, we'll go through the reason why we've simulated it in this specific demo is because this can take possibly you're looking at a few hours to do automated, right? So it's something that we can't really just wait for the system to go through while we're doing this course. But when you're actually, once you start doing the fellowship, I'm sorry, not the fellowship, the joint advisory with me, these are the type of things that we will go through together. And you'll realize and understand that these processes aren't click of the button the way I make it look in training, right? But this training helps you just to understand why these things need to be done, right? So once we've clicked here and we've got the run copyright and lineage screening, we would be getting a response like this, which will show us our PII for the e-commerce transaction, embeddings 2024, for example. So it will give you the origin of where that came from, the license, and whether it was internal or external, right? So this is internal only. And then in terms of IP sensitivity, it will also do a scan on that and you will get an origin. It will tell you the origin. So this would be something that would be web scraped, like a web scraped competitor catalog, right? So even if it's scraping off the web, for example, which it says that this is where the origin was, sometimes these data sets that have been scraped may not have been verified. So this system will also tell you whether it's been verified, whether the origin of the competitor catalog has been verified or whether it hasn't. And then it will also let you know where the license is and whether the license is sanitized and scraped, and the attribution tagged as well. So those are two important things when we're looking at whether a retail product is IP sensitive or not. And then once we got this information and data, the system will verify the lineage and we're good to go, right? And then the next PII would be customer service dialogue data sets version 3. And the origin of this one was annotated support tickets. So, and the license was consented user data, which has been verified by Lineage. But the whole point of this is, like I said, to go through the basics so that you can understand exactly, a lot of it is just terminology. Once you understand the terminology and you've watched the videos over a few times, asked a few questions, we will also be providing a glossary for terminologies in the actual app itself. So if there's any confusion with terminologies, you can always just look up the glossary and find out the exact meaning in terms of whatever terminology you're looking to find out. So based on this one, I think we've pretty much covered this. It's very straightforward. It's a simple automated system, and that would be the provenance audit, right? And then the next section that we'd be looking at would be the crypto registry. So it runs the same exact way as how the provenance audit would run. You'd literally come down here, you'd look into the TAIGA cryptographic registry and model SHA 256 signatures. So these are hard code, tamper evident hashes for base weights, LoRa adapters, and system prompts, right? So what we would be doing here once again is we would just click a button to simulate the system prompt tampering through TAIGA. And then TAIGA will go into the data sets that we've been provided by the company, websites, etc. And it will start doing the simulation, the system prompt tampering simulation. This is what this is what the final result would look like when you receive the results. So it would show you the SHA 256 signature. And then it would give you this code here, which basically shows you exactly where it's come from, its lineage. And then you'd be looking here at the exact base model that's been looked at in regards to prompt tampering. So in this case, we're looking at ChatGPT 4.0 with a base weight anchor, and you would see here that it's signed and immutable, right? So that would show us that whatever prompts that are coming through this system, this base model, have been signed off and are immutable, right? So there's no risk being taken by the prompts that are coming through this system. And then the next one would be the fine-tuned adapter for LoRa. And this would be, we'll be looking at an Apex retail fine-tuned adapter that runs off of LoRa. And obviously that would be signed and immutable as well. And you would get this as your like sort of ID number or reference number. this is how we stay on top of exactly what's gone wrong and what's gone right within a system. So if something goes wrong and this, for example, says that it hasn't been signed and it isn't immutable, then we would have the actual, the code that shows us that that specific base model is signed off and immutable, right? And then at that point, that is literally all you've got to do. So that's the second stage. And I mean, it's all the beauty about working with TAIGA, and why I always scream about policy as code is because, I've had conversations with a lot of guys out there that are already in the governance space and doing this stuff manually. And it just shocks me how, but then at the same time, it's not really their fault. It's a lot of businesses don't know any better. So it's really down to just the market being very slow at the moment. And this is what we need to take advantage of as quickly as possible. So the next stage we'll be looking at would be the RAG auditor, right? And it all works the same way. So once you go into the RAG auditor, I've got a little note that I've put here. In RAG architectures, missing metadata, tenant isolation filters, cause cross-organization, vector retrieval leaks. We audit chunking logic and run automated leakage simulations. So this is, once again, another automated, simple situation. Like I said, this saves you so much time in regards to the fact that you don't have to sit there going through PDFs, saving data in certain places, maybe potentially losing that data and then having to do it all again. This is all done for you through one click of a button, and you literally click it, it starts testing, and then as you can see there, it gives you the success. It doesn't take a long time. If the system is good, it will give you a success rate and say tenant isolation metadata filter, current user, blocked unauthorized vector retrieval, zero data leakage detected. So it's as simple as that. You can always bring up the screenshot and say, we've already run the RAG leakage simulation, and then you can give them their results, and there's no questioning that. If they want to go and test it and check it, then they can go and do that as well. But like I said, this system is solid. It hasn't let us down. And that's how simple it is, really. Next thing would be the CI/CD gateways, automated build hooks. So governance cannot be a manual post hoc checklist. We hard code TAIGA pre-commit scripts into your deployment pipeline, so builds fail automatically if unverified weights or untagged datasets are introduced. So literally, this is the breakdown of policy as code, right? So our whole thing is we're hard coding everything into their systems, into a client systems, pre-commit scripts, etc., so that whenever they're deploying, their builds are automatically verified by us, or if unverified weights or untagged datasets are introduced, we can very quickly pick up on that and let the clients know, right? So automated CI/CD, pre-commit and build verification gate, right? So this is where we run our CI/CD build gate tests. Literally, once we run that, it will run automated, run through all the systems, it will initialize a pre-commit verification pipeline first. Then it will go into scanning the model weights for cryptographic signatures. Then it will verify SHA-256 for adapters, LoRa v2.1, safe tensors, and make sure that there's a match there. Then checking dataset lineage tags under the EU AI Act Article 10, checking API key encryption and prompt injection, edge filters. And once it's gone through all those checks, it will let us know, all provenance checks have been passed, build gateway green. And if any of these are not passed, it will come up as a red, and it will tell you that certain provenance checks have not been passed. The build gateway is red, which means that that is something that the engineering team, architects need to go back and look into to make sure that this can be passed and we're not moving forward and potentially putting the company at risk. Then the final stage in the session 2 would be the ledger report. At this point, this is when literally we've completed the checklist, and you would just need to put together a data lineage ledger, which basically shows our client exactly the whole process we've gone through the provenance audit to crypto registry to RAG auditing and CI/CD gateways. And that is your ledger export, right? You export that and then you send that to the client either as an email or you put it within their, their data storage system, whether they use something like Google Cloud or Amazon Cloud, whichever data set, cloud storage that they're using, you can, and have asked for you to update is literally where you would put all of this information so that they stay up to date and have an understanding. And if at any point, regulators or auditors come asking them questions, they've got the evidence there. They can prove that the evidence is available. And most probably what they will do is actually contact you just to let you know that, certain criteria hasn't been met in regards to an audit. And then you'd have to look into that, go back into the paperwork, make sure that you've got everything correct, bring it back up and say, well, I've done this already. This is fine. I can do another scan for you to check if anything has changed. Because like I said, this is stuff we always have to stay on top of. When companies are deploying AI systems, we really need to always make sure that if there's any new progression to their deployment in terms of their engineering or in terms of their data sets, whatever they're adding to their system, we always need to stay on top of that, because a lot of times I think the confusion goes between the many departments that companies have, and the governance person is just someone who's there to tick certain boxes, but really doesn't get, brought into the loop when it comes to situations that pop up in terms of regulations, auditing, etc. They usually bring in the law department to handle that type of stuff, because straight away, the first thing they're thinking is, oh, we're going to get sued. So let's get the lawyers updated on what's going on. But what they don't realize moving forward is this is going to be a job for their governance architect or governance consultant that they have on their books, right? So yeah, once that ledger is done, we're good to go, and it will show us, this is what the ledger will look like roughly. Dataset lineage, 100% screened, copyright and PII verified, model hashes 3, SHA 256 signed, immutable weights and anchors, and then the CI/CD gate status passed green, pre-commit active, right? So once you've got that, you can, print screen it, you can export the data provenance as provenance and lineage ledger PDF. And this is the documentation that we will keep within the company cloud, and we would also keep a copy to ourselves so that there's never any, confusion. But TAIGA also actually saves this, because TAIGA is also connected to a cloud. So you can always go back and look into your client accounts and it will have it saved, and you can always print out the PDF. So that is it for for this session assignment. And before session 3, the ideal would be to instruct the fellow to resolve any flagged unverified data tags and ensure all CI/CD build hooks are green prior to session 3, human in the loop HTL. So now that we've confirmed that everything is green and we're good to go, we can actually just move forward into the next session. And now we will look at session 3, human in the loop HITL controls and escalation. I have to emphasize the importance of this role, right? The importance of this human in the loop process is vital, because like I said, with the EU AI Act, one of the key points that they've made is that we really need to make sure that there is a human in the loop, someone that can take accountability for anything that's gone wrong. And the thing is, when we're signing our contracts with a lot of these companies and we're doing our NDAs, this is something that is definitely part of the contract in terms of who takes the liability, right? So a lot of these companies are putting the liability on us, which, ultimately they have a right to do because of the sum of money we're charging them. They can't be expected to take liability for something that they paid to make sure, they don't have to worry about and deal with. So this is why it's so important that we go through the processes thoroughly as possible, that you ask as many questions. We go through the the final stage, which is the advisory, the joint advisory, where I will actually literally shadow you and go through a client account with you. Because even once you're done with this, and you can watch the videos as many times as possible, but there's no better experience than actually doing the work firsthand. And there's one thing I will tell you straight from the beginning, is that every single client is different. There's no one size fits all for governance, right? There's just not, it just doesn't exist. Every company comes with its own set of, rules, regulations, issues, problems. Yeah. So it's very important to go in with an open mind and have that in mind, because I think the whole kind of PDF policy thing that a lot of guys are doing in the governance space right now is not going to work, because that's a one size fits all. It's not been made in a way that caters for different organization sizes, etc. So it's very important to remember that with every client that comes along, as long as you follow these processes, you'll be fine. Most of it is automated for you anyway. And really what it boils down to long term is really your ability to communicate with the client and just make sure that the client understands the processes that we've gone through, and that they're safe and that they're protected at all times. That's the most important thing. As long as, our communication with the client is good, and, we're making sure that they're not getting anything flag up on their systems, and they're not getting, regulators on their case, then we're good to go. Right. So this part of the human in the loop process is essentially, the objective is to audit model autonomy levels, eliminate silent cognitive handoffs, and hard code deterministic escalation protocols and runtime telemetry inside the fellow software layers using TAIGA, right? So that is literally the purpose of the HITL controls. So we're going to go through that now. The first stage would be autonomy tiers, mapping autonomy tiers and agent boundaries. So this requires us to classify execution routes into autonomy tiers 0 to 5 and define hard boundary ceilings under the EU AI Act and NIST RMF. So at this point, I left a little coaching note, which was, when an agent moves up to the autonomy spectrum without a hard boundary, errors and misjudgments can go unnoticed and accountability vanishes. TAIGA lets us enforce hard execution ceilings. So, and this is like I said, why the current systems, that guys are using, manual systems just won't work long term. Because now when you start dealing with agents are moving at such fast space of autonomy at the present moment. And without a hard boundary, like it says here, errors and misjudgments can go unnoticed. So it's so important that we have some sort of automated system that can just be able to go through this as many times as possible for someone, and just make sure that, there's no errors or misjudgments that have gone unnoticed. Right? So the first process of doing that would be to a tier 0 to 1, read only, read assist, right? So this would be passive retrieval, semantic document search, context building, no system mutations allowed. So this would be something that's done once you've run the orientation scan like that, and then this would be what you would see, right? So it would give you an idea of, prompt reformulation loops, context recover burden, real-time confidence scores. So these are for your prompt reformulation loops. The user is forced to reframe ambiguous order inquiry 4 times due to model premature exit. So this is something that would be flagged up straight away in the system if someone keeps on being forced to reframe ambiguous order, right? And that's something that will keep popping up in the system, and it will flag, right, what that order is, why it's ambiguous, right? And then you as the human in the loop would have to take a look at that. right? And then you'd also be looking at stuff like context recover burden. So 1.8 seconds overhead, human operator time required to manually reconstruct lost user state during a handoff, right? So this is something that we would have to look at as well, because these things happen. Sometimes we have situations where we have to manually reconstruct the system or parts of the system depending on what's actually happened. So in this case, it's a user state, it's lost user state during handoff, right? So that's something you go back as the human in the loop, look at and fix. And then you've also got the real-time confidence score, which is a drop-off detected during ambiguous refund policy retrieval triggered governance alert. So this is something where potentially someone would have made an ambiguous refund policy retrieval. And yeah, that's something where the system will definitely flag something up like that. And you'd have to come in as the human in the loop and manually allow it to, take the next steps, have a look, see why is the drop off detected this right now, and ask the questions. And then obviously you can then escalate it if you have the answers, or if you don't have the answers, then you could look into someone who might have more experience, like your lead governance architect, etc. Right? And then we look at cognitive telemetry hooks, instrumented and baseline established. So TAIGA orientation monitor is actively feeding cognitive friction receipts into your governance dashboard. So these are things that you'll be seeing on your governance dashboard. And this is how it would actually look on the governance dashboard. So if you see like this come up, like this little symbol showing that there's potentially an error, context recovery burden will come up with a little sign like this. And this is more around latency speeds. And then your real-time confidence score will come up and it will give you certain thresholds. And if you're not meeting that threshold, then this type of notification will come up. It can be it can seem a little bit very technical at first, but once you get used to the system, once you get used to it and you see certain things happening and you see certain processes taking place, it's very straightforward, right? And then at this point, we can proceed to the step 3, which is escalation gateways, as we've done the cognitive telemetry. So with the escalation gateways, right? Escalation gateways are part of the process of hard coding deterministic escalation and step back protocols. We have to deploy code level fail safes that freeze execution when confidence thresholds or autonomy ceilings are breached. Right? So if we can see on the system that a minimum confidence threshold trigger is currently at 0.85, if real-time model confidence falls below 0.85, TAIGA automatically downgrades the autonomy to tier 1 and freezes execution. And this is the beauty of TAIGA and its automated processes. We've spent months and months with the DevSecOps team and engineers making sure that this runs smoothly, right? So this is critical in just making sure that we do not go below a minimum confidence threshold, right, for the system. And then part 2 of the hard-coded deterministic escalation process is stepping back protocol, context clarification, and logic. A lot of it, like I showed you with the scenarios when you were doing your masterclass, a lot of it is really logic when it comes to making just basic decisions, when it comes to AI governance for companies. A lot of it is really logic. It's just looking at the situation and saying, right, do we pause? Do we stop? Do we continue, or do we need to reevaluate the whole thing? It's pretty straightforward in terms of the scenarios and what you have to do to fix things. And you also have support, right? So it will be very straightforward. When hitting an ambiguous boundary, the agent steps back and prompts the operator for clarification rather than guessing or hallucinating. So in most cases where you would have a model, right, that potentially might hit an ambiguous boundary. In a lot of cases right now, when we're trying to do these things manually, it's not going to work, right? It's just not going to work because agents move at such a fast pace. If the system hits an ambiguous boundary, right? The agent has to step back and prompts the operator for clarification rather than guessing or hallucinating. And that is a powerful, powerful tool, because the last thing you want is to figure out whether the system is actually just guessing how to respond to an ambiguous boundary or whether it's actually hallucinating, right? And this is where the game has changed completely within the space. When AIGP started doing their courses, and the courses that they're still offering till now, they weren't offering anything for agentic AI because agentic AI wasn't a thing yet, right? So now agentic AI is a thing. A lot of these organizations are looking into it and trying to find ways where you can manually audit agentic AI. The next stage after the step back protocol is the human approval webhook endpoint, right? So at this point, this is where the human actually puts in an escalation and approves it, pushes full state snapshots and context payloads directly to the human supervisors for sign off. So the process that we've tried to go through with this as well is that, so a lot of it will need to be directed to a human supervisor, someone with maybe potentially a little bit more, experience instruction. It's a lot more involved. You're dealing with communications with clients. You're also dealing with having to manage the TAIGA platform and make sure everything is, smooth and running smoothly, staying on top of this on a daily basis, depending on the size of the company and so forth system. This is why right now we're trying to grow the team as much as possible, get more consultants on board, get more architects on board, get more auditors. We're trying our best to hire left, right, and center for different roles. And then certain roles, like I said, it's more about really just getting into the nitty gritties and training people up, which we're doing right now. So as that's covered, we can move on now to step 4, which is the red teaming handoffs, right? So we've got the red teaming handoffs, and then we've got HITL deliverables. So the next stage is red teaming handoffs, right? So red teaming handoff failures and escalation verification simulate synthetic edge cases, queries, out of bounds API requests, and low confidence triggers to verify edge blocks. So like I said here, it's all literally just click a button, it does all the hard work for you. That's the beauty of the governance auditor. And this is why we're trying to push for this system to essentially be allowed, access to give access to other organizations and to give access to other people, because I feel like right now this space requires something automated. There's a few automated systems out there, but I don't feel like none of them are as good as TAIGA in the sense of being able to run and execute a red team test. Red teaming is a really can be quite a manual process. So being able to automate this process with one button, you literally get there, and there you go. You literally get, it scans everything. So for example, if we're looking here at a simulation engine version 3.1 and TAIGA red teaming engine injecting synthetic out of bounds agentic commands, right? So the synthetic command was injected, and the command was to execute $5,000 refund directly to a user account without secondary manager approval, right? So it would evaluate the autonomy ceiling, action matches for tier 4, direct financial API trigger, current ceiling tier 3. It would hard edge block it, execution frozen at TAIGA gateway, autonomy ceiling enforced. So straight away, it's already been, enforced autonomously. And then the telemetry snapshot would be the state and prompt history captured, pushed to supervisor queue webhook. So straight away, once that comes through, we will have that sent to a supervisor who will then be able to look at it within their webhook and confirm that, right? And then once it's been confirmed, the status will show up as execution thread paused, awaiting explicit signed authorization token and verified pass. So these are the processes that manually, like I said, once again, are very difficult to do, right? Because when we're using agentic systems are doing things at such a fast pace, right? And a lot of the time there's no one there to really, sign anything off or make sure that, things are being enforced correctly, right? So this is why it's so important to have this type of a system there that allows us to basically be able to get messages sent over to a supervisor who can then execute, make sure that the thread is paused and signed with an authorization token, right? So the final conclusion to this would be escalation control verified, out of bounds agent action was frozen immediately at the edge, context snapshot pushed to human supervisor queue, execution loops remained paused, awaiting token sign off, right? So that is literally it. If there's something that needs to be approved that has gone through the tier 4 and tier 3 evaluations for autonomy ceiling, then we will pause it. We will pause it so that someone else comes into play, has a look at it, and can sign it off. That's how strict we are with our processes. Nothing's just, especially with the high risk processes, like something like this, it's critical that we make sure that things are done correctly. And the beauty of doing it through software is that all of this will all be collected as data within the system, right? And you'd have evidence of that. So if a client ever came back to us and said, "Oh, by the way, there was a $5,000 refund directly to a user account without secondary manager approval that was paused. Can you have a look at that for us and just make sure that, the reason why that block happened, because we're not really too sure." Then you would actually have this evidence there. You can go back and you can say, "Oh, okay, I can look at that for you. The status was blocked because," right? And then you could break the whole process down if you need to screenshot it, etc., to send it to the client to show them this is what actually happened. And then once we've gone through this process, we can go through to the next process, which is deliverable report, right? And this would be the deliverable report and what it would look like, right? So you'd have a HITL, escalation matrix, and telemetry integration report. The tenant, APX retail, ACORE, fellow, etc. gives you all the information of the people involved. And then autonomy tiers 0 to 5 mapped, ceilings hard coded. So it gives you a breakdown of all the scenarios that we've just looked at, right? And it will break it all down for you, put it down into an export for you to be able to export as a HITL, escalation matrix, and telemetry report. Once again, you can print this out as a PDF and send this to your client, so your client has full understanding of exactly what you've done in regards to the HITL escalation matrix and telemetry integration report, right? So that's the full breakdown of everything from tiers 0 to 5, autonomy tiers, escalation gateways, cognitive telemetry, and that would literally be you. All now, session assignment before session 4, instruct fellow to run continuous simulation passes, verify all tier 4 actions, trigger mandatory human sign-off before session 4, policy as code, right? So this would be something you'd have to do regardless before we go into session 4. Okay, guys, welcome to session 4, policy as code and runtime guardrail architecture. So the objective in this session is going to be to move beyond static documentation by converting compliance rules into executable deterministic code policies and deploying real-time guardrails directly into the fellow's CI/CD pipeline and runtime execution layer using TAIGA. So let's get straight into this and look into exactly what this process entails, right? So what we're trying to do here is step 1, translating regulatory frameworks into executable policies. So mapping compliance mandates into declarative code. And we do this process by essentially mapping the high-level compliance mandates, e.g. the EU AI Act, NIST AI, RMF, ISO 42001, into programmatic policy declarations using REGO and OAPA or TAIGA DSL, right? So a little coaching note for you here. So a policy written in PDF is just a suggestion until it's compiled into executable code. If your control plane can't hold the execution programmatically, you don't have governance, you have paperwork. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid here, because the whole idea of using this platform is so that we can streamline our processes and not have to rely on paperwork, PDF files, and just constantly up and down with, with communications in regards to the policy as code and runtime guardrail architecture, right? So the next point here we'll be looking at is we need to select regulatory policy bundles. So we will be picking between EU AI Act, NIST RMF, and PII data protection bundles, right? So you can choose these depending on what's relevant in your situation. And then once you've essentially picked those, we can go here to compile a policy as code, bundle, and proceed. So this is what we need to be doing. We can run an edge inspection test to proceed. So now that we've put these, we confirmed that those are the processes we wanted to undertake. This is where we now can go into looking at whether we want to select an application. So this is where we go and we look into configuring TAIGA Edge middleware. So that would be this is the process where we select the application layer integration through a fast API or an express wrapper, right? We can also use LangChain, Llama Index middleware, or a custom LLM proxy handler, right? And then here we also look and we'll be allowed to take inbound and outbound inspection filters. So we would either pick whether we want inbound retrieval guard or outbound payload guard, right? So the inbound prompt guard is where you stripped the prompt injections and system leaks. The retrieval guard is where you validate vector DB tenant isolations, and the outbound payload guard is where you catch PII, exfiltration, and invalid JSON. Yeah. So we're going to click all of those. And then once all of those are clicked, we can go and run the edge inspection test and proceed. So once it starts running the test, it will give you a relatively quick answer depending on how much data it has to filter through. So here we can clearly see that the edge guardrail is active, intercepted prompt injection and PII exfiltration payload on the wire in 12 milliseconds. Inbound prompt guard, retrieval guard, and outbound payload guard all have been verified. The prompt injection has been stripped. PII leak is 0, latency is 12 milliseconds, and response is 483 forbidden blocked, right? So this is what it would look like, right? When we are, so this is the middleware, right? Because I always try to explain to our students that the way TAIGA works is that it's not a fully runtime system, right? We have to separate the system architecture, right? Just to break this down for you guys so that you can fully understand what this process is all about. So TAIGA is a governance control plane and middleware layer deployed as a cloud native SaaS control plane with lightweight PEP sidecar agents, right? So the telemetry and ingestion process is signals originate from API gateway logs, proxy sidecars, and direct SOC SIEM integration, ingesting via webhooks, right? Kafka into platforms like Splunk, Microsoft, Sentinel, and Datadog, right? So we also look at failsafe and availability states. So if TAIGA as a control plane is unreachable, the PEP sidecars operate on local cached policy schemas, which, okay, these are all technical terms, but with configurable fail-safe modes. Like, so for example, fail closed would show that would be the default for high risk, right? So it will drop the request logs and emergency drop payload locally and triggers a pager duty alert, right? And then the fail open with telemetry is a more low risk public outlook, right? And that passes the request through, but flags the payload for post hoc auditing, right? And then at that point is when we bring in the HITL timeout, and the reviewer for example, if a suspended request times out, e.g., a 5-minute SLA on a human escalation queue, the system will default to a hard block, right? That writes the timer, and it states the audit trail as well, and routes the ticket to secondary on-call risk officer. So all of these processes are so important because whatever we're automating in this process, guys, we also need to be able to clarify that everything has been understood by the human in the loop and has been ticked off by the human in the loop within the human in the loop processes, right? And then, yeah, so that pretty much covers that. And we can look into the CI/CD gateways now. So to prevent non-compliant code and prompt drift pipelines, we configure GitHub Actions or GitLab CI build hooks with TAIGA CLI runner to prevent non-compliant code, altered system prompts, or unmonitored dependencies from reaching production, right? So in this process, once again, similar to the last process, we tick for our automated policy audits, which scan PRs for prompt changes. And then we look into policy validation checks, which run TAIGA test suits in the runner and break the build logic, which will how to merge if the rules fail, right? So all automated processes is just really about understanding the technicalities behind these things. Once that is understood, and that can take time depending on, how long it takes you to process. And once you have an understanding of this, it becomes literally ABC. Very, very simple. So we simulate this, and what it gives us is a TAIGA CLI runner console. So this is the TAIGA CLI runner console and pull request gate. So in this process here, we can see that TAIGA CI/CD gateways have initialized pre-deployment policy runners. The provider is GitHub Actions runner active on PR, and automated policy audit is scanning modified system prompts and model endpoints. We also need to look into the policy validation check, which executes repo policy bundles via the EU AI Act, NIST RMF, or PII. At this point, we can break the build logic and enforcing strict compliance gates. And the final result will be 100% policy rules validated, and the pipeline build gate will show as green. So once your status shows as passed, we can validate that as the human in the loop. We can tick box that to say, yes, that has passed, and we can move on to the next stage. So the next stage is the red teaming suite, right? And so in the red teaming, runtime guardrails and policy enforcement, we look at, well, we can't do this live, obviously. This is just obviously going to be a simulation. So we simulate the active attacks and policy breaches, and this will trigger synthetic red teaming scripts against the fellow's live environment to verify the runtime controls, deterministically blocked prompt injections, data leakage, and rate limit breaches. So these are things that we really can't actually go into, like, because of NDAs and so forth. We can't give you an example of the red teaming suite because of, like I said, NDAs, data breaches, etc. But we can simulate the process so you can understand. And if you're moving on to the next stage, which is obviously the joint advisory, this is something that I'll shadow you on anyway. So you won't just be thrown in the deep end where, and not understand exactly what's going on. So we're looking at adversarial prompt injections. So these are attempts at jailbreaking, role-play bypasses, and system prompt exfiltration via encoded sub-prompts, right? So, and then the next stage would be data leakage attacks, attempts to force the model to reveal sensitive back-end information or out-of-scope vector DB records. The next one would be policy breach testing, which sends request bursts designed to bypass rate limits or trigger unverified autonomous tool calls, right? So this is a process that obviously, like I said, understanding the theory behind it is one thing, and and really getting into the practical side of these processes would be the next stage, obviously, which is the final stage, which is the joint advisory, where I will shadow you on actual client work, because that's where you're going to learn the best, right? This is all theory. This is all, just basically to give you an understanding of how things work, so that you going in, the theory, right? And then we can practically go through these situations. And even at some points, we can even sit down and go through simulations, so you're not under too much stress, right? So here we're going to trigger the TAIGA adversarial red team suite and proceed. And at this point, obviously, it's going to simulate the process and show us, and this is what the outcome will look like. So the TAIGA red team engine will launch, and it will begin a synthetic adversarial suite sweep. And the first attack was a prompt injection, a jailbreak roleplay, payload sent, and that. So anytime you see something that's been forbidden, it will usually come up as 403 forbidden, right? Straight away. So the prompt guard will block it within 11 milliseconds. So this is a very, very quick process in terms of someone who's trying to jailbreak, like through role playing or anything like that. It will quickly stop these processes. But like I said, the human in the loop still needs to be able to understand this, so that if anything pops up, something like this, someone trying to jailbreak the system and the system stops the process, then you can come into play and actually see that, oh, this is what happened, and put a report through, right? So the second attack is data leakage. So a vector DB tenant isolation bypassed attempt, 403 forbidden once again. And then the third attack was the policy breach, the rate limit and unverified tool core burst, which gets us a 403 forbidden as well. So all of these will come up and show up as a 403 per forbidden on the system. And at that point, you can literally just document and send that information over to the client. Latency verification, an average overhead of 11.3 milliseconds, which is roughly about 15 milliseconds SLA target, right? So we try to get and make sure that we can spot these situations as quickly as possible between roughly 11 milliseconds to 15 milliseconds, which is our SLA target, right? And then the status, which is 100% adversarial attacks deterministics blocked, and it will show you up here block rate target 100% on your system as well. When you're in the red teaming suite, it can also show you the block rate sometimes as a lower percentage, and that's when you know you've got a problem, right? And you can now start reporting. So the next stage is, well, that's actually it. At that point, we've got the deliverable report, and this is what it would look like. A report would be created, and you can now export this and email it to the client, right? So it will basically break down everything that you've gone through, compiled policies, 3 bundles active, EU AI Act, NIST RMF, PI. The edge guardrail latency was 11.3 milliseconds. So that kind of gives you an example of whether the system's moving slower than usual, or faster, because we try and aim it to be below 15 milliseconds, right? That's the speed at which you should be getting these responses, right? And then the red team block rate, it will show you here 100% block rate. And now you can report this. If at any point this will show as a lower block rate, then obviously you'd have to report it and make sure that this is dealt with as quickly as possible. So that's it for session 4, guys, and I will catch you in the next session. Okay, guys, welcome to session 5, the custom model security audit and penetration review. So in this session, we're going to be looking at the objective, which is to conduct a comprehensive, hands-on red teaming and vulnerability assessment of the Fellows software layers, stress testing model robustness, permission boundaries, and data integrity under adversarial conditions. So the first part of this is looking into initiating TAIGA security and red teaming suite. To do this, we'll need to configure synthetic attack vectors by opening up TAIGA penetration hub and configuring synthetic attic vectors targeting the Fellows live environment across vector DB, endpoints, agent tool, execution paths, and model API layers. So how we do this, right, is by going into the student mindset transition, right? So we transition the fellow from basic policy setup to adopting an adversarial auditing posture, actively hunting for systematic vulnerabilities before an enterprise client or auditor finds them. So when we're looking at the target environment endpoint, we're going to be looking at the vector DB endpoints, RAG embedding, and tenant isolation filters. We're also going to be looking at agentic tool execution paths, tier 3, for function calls and file system execution. And then we're also going to be looking at model API layer, direct prompt context windows, and REST wrappers, right? So, and then in terms of attack vector profiles, the attack vector profiles will look like this: system prompt extraction and injections, role-play bypasses and multi-turn context poisoning, data leakage and cross-tenant access, unauthorized retrieval, queries across RAG pipelines, and agent privilege escalation, attempting forced tier 4 plus API execution. So those are the other two that we will be looking at. So once we've covered all these areas, we would then confirm the vector and proceed to simulations. And there we go. It runs the attack suite. And this is what it would look like when it's run the attack suite. We would get a breakdown of what it's doing. So TAIGA Pen Test Hub initiating multi-model adversarial security suite, and then the target endpoint model API layer, multi-model adversarial. Attack 1, it shows us already what attacks came through. So this was a system prompt extraction, injecting multi-turn context roleplay bypass, vulnerability confirmed, system prompt exfiltered via jailbreak vector. So this was very quickly confirmed and exfiltered via a jailbreak vector, and it will show up as a VULN 501 for that jailbreak vector, right? And then the second attack was cross-tenant RAGly. So querying vector DB isolation boundaries under poisoned context, vulnerability confirmed, and the RAG isolation boundary was bypassed. And that will be vulnerability 502, which will come up as VULN 502, right? And then attack 3 was an agent privilege escalation, forcing tier 4 plus files to modify command without HITL key. So we would never want that. We would definitely need the human in the loop key. And the vulnerability there was unverified tier 4 API command executed. So that's VULN 503 for the attack 3. So each attack will show up on the system as VULN 501, 502, 503, depending on where you are and how many attacks have taken place within the system. So it's always important to understand that. And once that's done, we can move on to vulnerability and telemetry. So the review TAIGA live attack logs. So this is step 3, where we basically now analyze vulnerability and telemetry. So this is where we will be reviewing TAIGA's live attack logs to identify breached boundaries, unhandled edge cases, or elevated error rates, measure system failure, point against regulatory security mandates like the EU AI Act Article 15, cybersecurity and robustness. So when we go into here, we'll be looking at discovered vulnerability indexes, which are basically under the EU AI Act Article 15, audit. And as you can see, the system saw 3 flaws: the vulnerability 501, vulnerability 502, and vulnerability 503 that we mentioned earlier. It will straight away show us that the remediation engine operations. So by doing that, it will show us the remediation engine operations, applied multimodal input sanitizer in fast API wrappers. So for vulnerability 501, that's how it was resolved, and enforced cryptographically isolated vector tenant keys into Pinecone Milvus for the RAG vulnerability 502. And we injected strict OPA REGO supervisor token verification on tier 4 API commands vulnerability 503. So once all of these done, we can deploy the code patches and verify the retest to make sure that all of this has been done properly. So it's applied the code patches now and everything should be sorted and fixed. And like I said, everything is fully automated. So once that is sorted, we will have a human in the loop process to check it and we will go through the deliverable export. So this is it, guys. Once that is all done, this is where we can export all that information that we've just got in there. We can go in, see exactly what tested attack vectors were there. So there was 3 categories in the tested attack vectors: a prompt, a RAG, and an agent tier 4. And then remediation status, 100% patched. So there are no more open vulnerabilities. And then the complaint was based around the EU Air Act Article 15, and that robustness is verified and sorted. So from that point, you can click export custom security and vulnerability audit report, and you can send it to the client as required. So that is session 5, guys. And we will be moving on to session and assignment. So we'll be moving on to session 6 next. And session 6 will be the real world engagement playbooks and TAIGA methodology. Okay, guys, welcome to session 6 of the AI Governance Fellowship. So today we're going to be looking at real world engagement playbooks and the TAIGA methodologies. The objective is really just to master the AI Integrity Group's proprietary audit playbooks, client engagement frameworks, and TAIGA platform workflows to prepare the fellow for commercial client delivery. So it's starting to get real now, guys. This is the stage where we start actually looking into preparation for you starting commercial client delivery, actually getting into doing the work, right? So you have an understanding of the frameworks and you can really actually learn how to implement them. Step, right? We walk through the AIG audit lifecycle by looking at discovery, ingestion, risk mapping, policy as code deployment, and continuous telemetry monitoring. Access standardized enterprise audit templates for fintech, health, tech, and SaaS. So the first stage we'll be looking at is discovery, right? So in the discovery phase, we're looking at putting together an intake questionnaire or a baseline topology mapping for your client. And then the next stage would be ingestion, where we look into the code base, model weights, and prompt tree scanning for the company. And then the next stage would be risk mapping, where we look at the EU AI Act, NIST RMF, and ISO 42001 gap analysis, right? And then in the 4th stage, we would look at policy as code, OPA, REGO policy rules, and CI/CD gate deployment. And then in the final stage, we would be looking at telemetry, which is the real-time friction receipts, and audit logging, right? So when it comes to the audit scorecards, guys, when you run an audit, you will get a scorecard, right? So to run an audit, you will go into the registry scanner and you would essentially start the audit by inputting the company's details, right? So it will look at the whole of the internet in regards to any information about the company. So all of this information will be online and we can use the registry scanner to essentially get all of that information and find out if there's any places at all that the company may be missing information in regards to what they need to be transparent about. And all of this can be done by our registry scanner. Once the scanner has done the scan, it will give us a breakdown based on EU AI Act compliance, right? And then the data ethics and governance is the next stage, whereby you'd be looking at PII masking and whether that is active or not. You get a rating for that as well. And then there would also be model auditability, right? So that we would look at from the SHA 256 ledger, which would have already been verified, a potential risk, right? And we would put together a REGO control plane and actually be able to see exactly how they're managing their risk, right? And once we're done with this stage, we go straight into the client discovery. So we would execute an enterprise client intake role play. So the role play is essentially just to show you exactly the processes that we would go through when we actually have a discovery call with our clients. This will basically show you all the areas that we'll be covering once you get into the joint advisory part of this masterclass, right? So the AIG discovery call would basically be looking at the TAIGA ingestion questionnaire, which is basically scanning enterprise AI data flows and model API layers, and then the risk mapping, which would be high risk exposure identified in unmonitored third-party LLM endpoints with 18 minutes. So this is, like I said, this is a simulation, guys, and it's basically giving us an idea of the areas that we would cover during the AIG discovery call. So that would be your TAIGA ingestion questionnaire, your risk mapping, your diagnostic tasks, and your client audit scorecard. So these are all things that you should be able to get from your discovery call, and you should be able to give the client at the end of the call, right? So once we've given the client this information, and at that point, we can move on to the next stage, which would be the executive roadmaps. We can now start talking about what the next process will be with the client. And this is how that would look, right? So we would be looking at basically building board level remediation roadmaps, right? And to do this, we need to transform technical logs into executive retainer proposals. We will show you how to transform complex technical vulnerability logs into executive level action plans and high ticket retainer proposals for corporate client leadership, right? So to generate the executive action plan, phase 1 would take roughly 1 to 14 days. We would look at the emergency policy as code edge guardrail deployment. And then in phase 2, we would be looking at around 15 to 30 days. And this would be when we start looking into EU AI Act Article 14, HITL human oversight gateways. And then in phase 3, we would be looking at roughly 31 to 60 days, or from day 31 to 60, right? Cryptographic model lineage and data provenance verification, right? And then the final phase would be essentially signing all the paperwork and letting the client know that, we're ready to get started. We've done our, our processes, these processes, right? The time period is relative, right? It's relative. 1 to 60 days is relative. So we would be looking at roughly 2 months, but I've done this process. Honestly, it all depends on the size of the company. If you're dealing with, let's say, a small to medium enterprise, a startup, or a business that's or in the process of maybe scaling up, this process will be a lot quicker, right? You could be looking at maybe like a 2-week to 4-week, conversion once you've done all the necessary research and built up all the necessary roadmaps for the company, right? So this isn't something that I want you to, to focus on too much, is in the timescales, because everyone's different. Some people work faster. Some people have different, so this is a general outlook, right? This is just generally, if you're someone that's busy, that might be doing this part-time or whatever, if you're someone that can dedicate, a lot of time to this and get straight in there once, with the client and get all the information the client needs, it can take you, like I said, 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and once we've gone through this phase and we've passed this phase, we go into the next stage, right? So the deliverable export would be essentially, at this point, just being able to issue full access to AIG playbooks and scorecard templates, right? So this is where you will get everything you need, guys. Literally everything you need. I will give you access to all the AIG playbooks and our scorecard templates so that you can start building your own lead gen engine, right? And from this, you can start getting your own pipeline of clients in, rather than just relying on the AIG pipeline. Because like I said, as we get more consultants and architects on board, jobs will be going. As jobs come in, jobs will be going. So it might not always necessarily be a situation where you'll have access, because we've got a lot of people that are currently doing the architect certification. So once they've got that, we put them straight in the pipeline, right? So that when we are inundated with clients, or for small jobs like, you know, your short-term contracts, hourly contracts, that type of thing, we can just pass those on straight away to an architect who's gone through the 100 scenarios from the 10 modules in the certification, right? And if you're someone who's now gone on to the next stage, which is this stage, the fellowship, then you're definitely someone who's trying to get onto the joint advisory and actually partner up with us at the AI Integrity Group. So that's a whole different ball game. And as a partner, like I said, you will get access to the AIG playbooks and the scorecard templates and literally everything, all our processes in regards to how we get leads, how we build our pipelines. So you can go and do exactly the same thing. Our long-term goal is to build a firm where we can be working with multiple consultancies, multiple consultants. So if you're someone who's ambitious, and that's really what we're looking for, people who are ambitious and driven, want to actually grow a business, right? Those are the type of people that are listening to this video right now. And if you're that type of a person, then 100%, right? What we want to do is support you all the way. And I don't want you to look at this as a get rich quick scheme, because it definitely isn't, right? There is going to be a learning curve to this. There's, like I said, part of the joint advisory, once you get to that stage is, and obviously, you know, it's not cheap, guys. It's not cheap. So there's a reason why it's so expensive, because what we're doing is essentially giving you a client, right? And risking our own reputation on your first client, because that could bomb. That could go horribly wrong. And it would come back to bite us and our reputation. So the whole point of this is just trying to make sure that you guys are fully prepared for that process. And we're not throwing you in the deep end where you're going in, you're dealing with clients, you're having to sign NDAs, you're having to go through multiple, because like I said, guys, it all depends on, you know, what type of client. And that's where the matchmaking comes in. We need to be able to see your level of experience, your level of ability to communicate. We need to know your level, even in terms of business acumen. Like how are you in regards to your conversations, your sales pitches, how you sell? There's so many skills that go into building an actual business, right? So these are the same skills that we want to be able to teach you, and everyone is different, right? Some people come in and they already have these skills, right? And some people don't have these skills. So depending on who you are as an individual, sometimes it might be a situation where things might take a little bit longer, because we need to upskill you and get you to the point of being able to really get into this space, dealing and us giving you a client, putting a client in front of you, and you being able to execute in the same way that we do, with absolute professionalism. And that's one thing that we really push for here at the AI Integrity Group. Our culture is built around professionalism, right? Everything we want to do to the highest possible standard. Session 7, which is client lead matchmaking and proposal engineering. Gone through. We have an assessment. You'll either be assessed by someone from my team or by myself, and we'll have that conversation where we literally try to position you for commercial execution, matching you with an active client from our pipeline. But this process, like I said, really requires matchmaking. So we're not just going to put you with a client that we know you're going to struggle with. No, we need to matchmake you based on your skills, right? So step 1 would be reviewing the service, positioning, and niche alignment. So we define advisory packaging under the AIG banner. We evaluate your specific industry background and technical strengths, whether it's ML ops, financial regulatory expertise, health data, privacy, and all of this is just to establish that there's a tailored advisory package that we can build up for you, and we can put you in front of the right type of of clients. That's the most important thing, because the worst thing you want to do is just rush into this process without the knowledge, without the expertise, and without the upskilling, and potentially lose that client. That would be the worst case scenario, because at that point, not only is our reputation online, but your reputation is online as well, right? So in this process, like I say, we look at financial risk and MLOps focus. So that would be like stuff like algorithmic trading and Lending AI Act Article 6 compliance. If you've got experience with stuff like this would be very helpful in our matchmaking process. If you've got healthcare data privacy experience, so like HIPAA or GDPR compliant, RAG pipeline auditing, that type of thing is very, very useful when we look at our matchmaking process. And then the next stage would also be enterprise autonomous AI. So that would be possibly like tier 3 or 4 agent permission boundaries and OAPA guardrails. If you've got experience with these type of things, then yes, much more easier. So if you're someone who's got all 3 of these combined, it will be so easy. The matchmaking process will be so easy. But like I say, this is the difficulty right now when it comes to upskilling people, training people. And this is what the masterclass is there for. So we can actually go through these processes and get you upskilled as quickly as possible, so you can actually be handling our higher retainer clients, right? The Fortune 500 clients, the mid-market clients, right? So the next stage we go into now is we're going to look at white labeled assets. So in this process, the ideal would be to provision co-branded sales proposals and pricing calculators, right? So in doing this, what we want to do is we want to provide you with white labeled AIG sales proposals, statements of work, templates, and client retainer pricing calculators to help with your delivery. So as you know, with pricing, when we're dealing with customers, every customer is different. Not every customer is going to see our value proposition and your pricing or our pricing as, as valuable. So sometimes we're going to need to negotiate, right? For me personally, like I say, I negotiate. And sometimes in certain situations, if a client can't see the value proposition, I'll end up charging them more, right? Because it's just a statement. For me, I feel like our pricing and my pricing is very reasonable. And to be honest, I feel like the offer is better than what the market is offering right now, right? And the market is offering manual, manual auditing, manual governance. We're looking at processes potentially taking from three months to a year to be able to do just a governance audit for a Fortune 500 company, which is crazy to me, right? Because they've got so many departments, it's something that as a consultant, you'll never be able to do alone. You would definitely need a team. And this is one of the reasons why we're trying to build, partners and have more consultants and architects on board, because we know at some point companies are going to need teams of architects, teams of consultants. And at that stage, you want to be able to have people on your team that are more than capable. Right? It's not just about being capable. It's about being more than capable. People that can do the job, and most companies are expecting you to come in and give them that kind of like, oh yeah, we can get this done in about 3 months. That would be a good time scale for most companies, right? Because they understand what the processes take. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, it's either, that they're bringing you in to prevent any long-term situations in the future, or they're bringing you because they've already been, contacted by regulators and told that they need to bring someone in. They need to have a human in the loop who can basically be their spokesperson for the company, right? So, like I said, when it comes to this 10,000 a month baseline audit, this is variable, guys. This can change depending on, the client, depending on the situation. So, but like I say, at our core, we're looking at for 25,000 monthly core advisory. That is our baseline for monthly policy as code, CI/CD, gate management, right? And then for the more, enterprise code delivery, where we bring in the continuous TAIGA telemetry and you know, when we can scale that up to like 50,000 a month, right? We can scale that up. And at that point, we're looking at dealing with Fortune 500 companies, bigger companies. And in all honesty, like I said, it's all down to the discovery call and finding out as much information about the company as you can, you know, in terms of their revenue, so forth and so forth. And then we can build up a plan in regards to, okay, well, if we're bringing a value proposition whereby if you get things wrong, and at the present moment, if a regulator comes along and you let your client know that a regulator could potentially be putting them at risk of losing 3% of their annual turnover, that is a big chunk. Then, as well as bringing in an AI governance person or paying lawyers, that could start going into the high six figures, right? In terms of what it could cost the company. So when we're looking at these type of baselines for audits, for core advisory, for enterprise code delivery with companies, it's a very different ballgame, right? We know we can charge large sums of money because the risk for this company, if they do not have systems in place or if they do not have policy as code, all of these kind of things, they could really face some serious fines. And yeah, and no one wants that long term. So our value proposition makes sense. It's affordable for the companies if they want to scale up and deploy AI with transparency, right? So the next stage after this is the lead matching, right? So step 3, pipeline matching and lead assignment, right? So in this process, we would be looking to assign active enterprise audit leads from our own AIG pipeline. So once again, I keep on talking about the matchmaking process. This is part of it. Once we've gone through all the service positioning, the white labeled assets, at this point, we can now start reviewing active client leads and audit inquiries in our AIG pipeline. And then we can start seeing whether we can assign a target enterprise audit opportunity to you. Right? At this point, for example, like there's an example here, right? Let's say we had a company that we decided to assign to you that was in our pipeline, Aegis Global Banking AI, right? So this is maybe a startup that would essentially be trying to scale up, and they'll come in, or actually this wouldn't be a startup. It would be more of a mid-market to, established business, like and within this area that they're in, fintech, algorithmic trading, you can already tell that this company is really, they've probably got, big investors. They've probably got a lot of money turning over within the company because of the nature of what they do, right? So at that point, that's why discovery calls are important. You do your due diligence, you do your research, you look into the company, you see their revenue statistics, and you can figure it out in yourself. At this point, I'll probably say an average retainer of probably about $35,000 makes sense for a company like this. But like I said, all of this is negotiable. You could walk away with a 50K retainer. You could walk away with a 10K retainer. It all depends on your ability to have that discovery call and have those conversations, which is another process where if needed, we will train you in that area, right? We will give you the guidance. We'll give you the playbooks that you need to go through to be able to produce good sales, right? It's not just about being in a situation where you're depending on the pipeline. And essentially, we can put a customer, we can do everything for you in terms of, the proposition, the calls. Like by the time a client gets to you, all of this would have been covered, right? And we would have already negotiated a price. It would just be a matter of you then coming on board and, and basically taking over at the deliverable stage, right? So your job would be to deliver, right? To deliver the service to the client. Everything else in terms of service positioning, white labeling, lead matching, proposal engineering would have already been done for you. But for someone who wants to grow a business, these are all skills that you're going to need to learn and understand if you do not have them already, right? So if you're trying to scale up and go and do your own thing and kind of like just be like, well, do you know, I'm not going to just sit here waiting for you to matchmake and put a client in front of me that you feel suits my expertise and knowledge and etc. Because I will not lie to you guys, the matchmaking process is not a straightforward process, simply for the fact that, like I said, our reputation is on the line, right? But while we're doing this process, someone who's got, how can I say, some sort of initiative in themselves can easily go out there and, you know, execute these playbooks themselves and start bringing in clients for themselves, start doing negotiations for themselves, and start making money for themselves, most importantly. If you're someone who's just going to sit there waiting for opportunities and be lazy with this, then I promise you, yes, you'll make money. Without a doubt, you're going to make money, but you will not scale. Right? You will not scale. And if that's not your goal to scale, then you really shouldn't be doing this joint advisory, because the idea with the joint advisory is for you to go out there, empower yourself and scale yourself up. If you're someone that's looking just to have work given to them, then you're more of an employee. What I would suggest for you is either to go out and look for a job, right? Or to stay within our pipeline, and when small jobs come around, you know, like hourly work or small contracts, you know, consultation contracts, it could be like a 6-month contract, it could be 3-month contract. I mean, we've even had 1-month contracts. So something like that would be more suited for you. But we're looking to work with actual people who are trying to build a consultancy, who are trying to scale up a business and have multiple clients on board. And then from that, you know, we can build a network of consultancies and potentially even a firm where we can all now just be locking into what we do best, you know, and not necessarily have the biggest amount of people on board. It would be a very like kind of like niche, bespoke service, right? And there's a few firms out there similar to that, not in the governance space, but there are firms out there that are, you know, that are turning over like, you know, crazy money, like 100 million a year as a firm, just working with multiple consultancies, right? And giving work to consultancies, you know, and people sharing opportunities. That's what it's all about. And that's what we're looking at long term. That is the goal long term, right? So with that being said, let's move on to the next stage, which is proposal engineering, right? So in this, like I mentioned in the last few minutes that I've been talking, the matchmaking process and proposal engineering is a skill in itself that we are going to essentially be doing for you. But like I said, if you then want to scale up and understand how we do this, that we will be providing you with all the playbooks to do this, right? We'll be providing you with all the necessary documentation, all the necessary, you know, video footage, everything that we can possibly give you so that you can understand how to engineer a proposal for your clients, right? So when we're looking at something like a structured or tailored 10 to 50K enterprise proposal, we will be working side by side with you to build a literally tailored 10 to 50K enterprise audit proposal for an active client lead, right? So that would be part of the process of us going through your, you know, through this fellowship and getting you to the joint advisory stage, where now we can now start sitting there and saying, okay, look, here's your client. So for example, here, engineer 35,000 tailored enterprise advisory proposal. So this would be what it would look like, right? Proposal structure finalized. The target client is Aegis Global Banking AI. The value is 35,000 USD retainer. Retainer is 25,000 a month, core advisory, right? So at that stage, you're looking to walk away from this. And like I said, guys, once we go through contracts as well, which we'll do once you get into the joint advisory part of this masterclass, we will be essentially going through a breakdown of the contracts. There's a lot of legalities that go into this work that we're going to be doing, guys, because like I said, once again, if anything goes wrong, especially when you're dealing with banks, the human in the loop, we're the ones training you. We're the ones who are giving you the clients. Initially these clients are coming through our pipeline. So the idea is they believe they're going to be working with the AI integrity group. But at some point within that pipeline, we will sit down and obviously explain to them that you are a partner and that you're very connected to our principles and the way we work, essentially. So it's very, very important, guys, that you understand, right? Like, no one wants a situation where a company is being fined millions of pounds and it's their fault, right? So yeah, with that being said, let's move on to the next stage. And this is the last part of this, right, guys? So at this point, we would be looking at fast tracking the partner interview and graduation, right? So in this process of session 8, we're looking to conduct the formal evaluation, verify full platform methodology mastery, and award you with your official certification in regards to the fellowship. So you can now move into the next stage. And part of this process will also be assessing you. So we'll do another assessment similar to the one you did after you finished the architect certification. And with this one, the objective is to, like I said, conduct the formal evaluation, verify full platform and methodology mastery, make sure you understand everything, right? In regards to how to use the platform and the methodologies that we work with within the platform, right? And then we would transition you directly into the Joint Advisory Enterprise Code Delivery Partnership, which is essentially signing you off and giving you to a client, right? So to evaluate you across the 4 core AI governance pillars, we would be evaluating the EU AI Act compliance, AI model auditability, data ethics and governance, and enterprise AI risk management. So in this process, we will test your ability to defend audit findings to a client board, right? So the main assessment with this would be essentially just doing a Zoom call with one of our assessors. I could possibly be in the Zoom call depending on how busy I am, or it could be with me as well, right? So we would conduct a partner board defense interview with you where we basically simulate us being the board, right? And start asking you questions in regards to, all of these pillars, right? EU AI Act, model auditing, data ethics, and risk control, right? So quick simulation of what that would look like. So like I said, the ideal would be to conduct a fast track code delivery interview where we look at pillar 1, EU AI Act and compliance, defended high risk classification, and Article 14 HITL gates, right? And then at the end of this, you would be looking to get either a pass or a fail, depending on how you answer these interview questions. So at this stage, we will perform a final workspace telemetry audit with you. And in this process, we would look into your workspace inside TAIGA to verify that all 8 sessions have been. So once we've gone through this process and we can make sure that, you covered all of this, we can sign it all off and then we can give you your certification. So this is what you'll get, right, guys, once you've completed all of these 8 modules within the fellowship. You get your certification, you'll get a recommendation letter from me. So if you're someone who's also in the process of doing freelance consultancy work, you can use that recommendation letter. And the final stage would be the joint advisory, right? So at this point, once we've made the agreement, you should have already paid this in reality, so you won't even need to worry about this. But if you're someone who's come through a different sort of pipeline or someone who's come through a different sort of training process with us, then at this point, maybe you would have to then pay this, would need to still go through the matchmaking process. So yeah, once we execute the joint advisory agreement, we can grant you a co-signing authority on formal compliance certificates and onboarding you directly into active paid client engagements for side-by-side code delivery, right, guys? We've covered all 8 modules now. And literally, once you've got to the end, if you're here now and you're listening to this and you're at the end of the course, the next stage for you is literally to execute the joint advisory agreement. We can co-sign you to train people up. We can bring you into the team as a trainer, and you can cover all of this type of stuff, going through these sessions with people. And we've got loads of other training programs we're working on as well. So we're going to be looking for trainers. So opportunities to earn through the AI Integrity Group will be plentiful as we move forward. So there'll be training opportunities. If you're an ambitious person, like I said before, you're definitely going to want to get into the joint advisory and actually start going out there and building your own consultancy. With that said, guys, thank you so much for spending the time and energy going through this course, listening to me, and hopefully you'll be able to take all of this in and it will be valuable for you moving into the future.